David, what a fantastic game last night. 2-2 at the Coleraine Showgrounds between Coleraine and Linfield. Linfield raced into a 2-0 lead. They were 2-0 up at half time, but Coleraine fought back in very difficult conditions in the second half. Got that late equaliser from Charles Dunn with a header at the back post. Great game.
Phenomenal game, I've got to say, Keith. First of all, delighted that it was on the iPlayer. I was coming back from a weekend away and wasn't able to sort of get up to the Showgrounds to watch it in person, so to speak.
I like to think that the BBC caved to my demands, and that's why it was on.
I have absolutely no doubt that they looked at your excellent column, Keith, and thought, listen, if Mr. Bailie is saying we need to get this game on, we need to get it on. Listen, you and I have talked about the politics with a small p as to why it wasn't and then why it did. But listen, I'm not overly interested in all of the noise behind the scenes. Delighted that the game was on the iPlayer. Now, the game itself, first of all, to all of the players and the supporters, a massive well done, because that was one horrible, stinking evening. Gee whiz, the wind and the rain was relentless, and yet wasn't it fantastic to see a packed out Coleraine Showgrounds, from the Coleraines, that they appeared to have filled, two and a bit of the sides, down this side, across here and up here, massive Linfield support, which is usual when they go up to Coleraine, part of the stand here, and then behind the goal. Atmosphere was excellent. Story of the game, pretty simple. First half, Linfield were by far the dominant force. Scored two good goals. On reflection, they could have put the game to bed. They could have scored a third, possibly a fourth. They didn't do so. Second half, roles reversed. Coleraine came out and were very much the team in the ascendancy, and deservedly, got 2 goals back in the game, ended up in a draw. So typical, Linfield dominant first half, Coleraine second half. Over the piece, I think it was a correct, result for both sides. David will look at it. David Healy will think, if we'd done a little bit more in the first half and maybe come in with 3 goals, or if we'd been able to sustain the pressure that was coming from Coleraine in the second half, maybe we could have got the 3 points. Rory will think, again, he'll think, well, we didn't start particularly well. We would have wanted the 3 points. We would have wanted to make a statement. We found ourselves 2 goals behind, so maybe now on reflection, yep, that's a fair enough result. For me, at the end of the day, 2 each was the correct result on the night, given the performances of both teams. But a fabulous game of football, played in horrendous conditions, and it certainly served up great billing. And well done, BBC, for whatever reason. And yes, you have listened to Mr. Bailie for getting that game on.
Well, what about set pieces? They were a really major impact on that game. The goals came from, 3 of the 4 goals came from set pieces. It was a clear factor in the game. We're seeing more of that, or do you just think it was because of the weather last night that became such a key factor?
Do you know, Alan Pardew many years ago was talked about as being a dinosaur. I think it was Alan Pardew being a dinosaur when he referred to to the importance of set pieces in a game. Stop that. Fast forward, I remember conversations with Gary Hamilton, and Gary educated me about the importance of set plays, corner kicks, free kicks, throw-ins. And, when Gary actually started showing me all of the stats, around that time, I thought, gee whiz, Gazzy has got something right here. And I think it's now just being fashionable again, almost. It's okay. I used to sort of think, well, if a team only relies on set pieces and free kicks, well, they mustn't be much of a footballing team. Listen, we're in the results business. Absolutely just about results. End of story. When you think of Kirk Miller's ball in for Matthew Fitzpatrick's first goal, what a ball. That, in fact, is Kirk's 206th assist. His 205th came against Ballymena on the previous weekend. So when you think of that contribution from him as an individual, but on the night, obviously defences didn't overly cover themselves in glory, if we're being honest.
Coleraine goalkeeper Aidan Harris had a tough night.
He had a difficult night. But I've got to say, but the defenders around him maybe didn't overly help. And I've got to say, with regards to Chris Johns, he could quite rightly look at his defenders and say, well, what was going on, fellas? I remember, as a centre back playing, I wasn't really looking for the goalkeeper to come and take charge of the situation. I just wanted to get my head in the ball, and that was my job, and that was the job I expected of my other defenders. So obviously the conditions assisted those who were, giving the assists with balls into the box, so to speak. And yes, the defences maybe could have done better. But listen, it gave us the entertainment that we got.
David Haley talked about feeling that Linfield had missed opportunities to go 3-0 up and feeling that maybe this was 2 points dropped or a game that got away from them. Is that the right way to look at it, or do you look at it from the perspective that actually a draw away at Coleraine a good result? Given
the run that Coleraine were on, if I was coming from a Linfield perspective, I would have most obviously would wanted to be going to get the 3 points. In fact, I would have put that expectation. I would have made that demand of my players. But looking at where Coleraine were at the moment, and just a little run, Linfield got themselves back on track with a solid performance against Ballymena United on Saturday past. I would have been happy, coming away with a point. When you go 2 up and you find yourself in that situation, I can understand totally David's frustration. And as I say, the story is quite simple. They got 2, they could have 3, possibly even 4. But it wasn't the fact that they didn't kill the game off. It's when Coleraine were in the ascendancy, that they didn't were able to withhold or withstand the pressure that they were put under. And some people maybe say, well, why were Linfield so good in the first half and maybe not so good in the second half? It's not that they purposely went out not to play well. It's just a simple fact, Coleraine got it more right in the second half. Rory Higgins made a couple of changes at half time, which I thought were absolutely spot on, and particularly Lyndon Kane. If you think of the first goal that they got, it was a pass from Lyndon Kane down the side to the young lad who came on, who'd been injured for a period. His name is, you're going to help me out here. Yes, ball into the box. Young Sean Brown got the ball tangled in his feet. Matthew, Shevlin is there, but puts it away. But it's the impact that Lyndon Kane has, and that's just an example. So when you're under the cosh, that's when you've got to see it out, and if you don't, then you pay the price. So I can understand David's frustration. Me reflecting back, listen, that was at the end of the day, it's about a result. That's a good solid point at an outstanding Coleraine side. From a Coleraine perspective, they would have wanted to win, but it took an inspired second half performance, from Coleraine. And their players to really come to the party. And I think, given where he found himself at halftime, Rory Higgins, would be to say more than pleased with the point. What I loved about him was about how he puts it back on himself. When he talked about the changes, maybe I didn't get my team selection right. And
rather than blaming the 2 players that he took off at half time.
Correct. Rather than saying, listen, we put those 2 lads on, and quite frankly, they didn't meet up to the standards, and the 2 stinkers, because they weren't as physical as I would have needed them to be. Didn't say that. Just say, listen, maybe I didn't get that right. And that protects the players. That's good management, and that's very fair. And yet, and didn't sing his own praises by saying, well, it was my changes that got us back in the game. So on the night, I think a point was a fair result.
Is there a question mark there over Coleraine? They've been excellent this season for the most part, I'm sure you'd agree. But twice they've came up against big games at the Coleraine Showgrounds and not got the win. They were poor in that second half against Glentoran when they lost 2-1, and then again on Tuesday night, not brilliant in the first half against Linfield, and let Linfield run up a 2-goal lead.
Well, let's look back at the Glentoran game, Keith. Second half Glentoran were absolutely exceptional. Absolutely exceptional, and if truth be told, they were physically very big and strong and really went after Coleraine, and I think it was maybe a little bit of a shock to some of those. Remember, this is there was the nucleus of a side there. Rory has already said that, but he's made additions, and this is a new team coming together, and players who, for the first time, they're getting to know what Irish League football's about. So, that was, on that day you sort of thought, right, well, I would expect the Coleraine players to have learned, from that experience. Last night, Linfield started just like a house on fire, and I don't think Coleraine were expecting it. I thought, they thought that they wouldn't come up against that. Linfield were excellent. They really went after Coleraine from the get-go. But again, then it was the second half response, not just from their manager, but from them as players, and that will stand them in good stead. So I wouldn't be looking to criticise in any way or take a cheap shot at them. This is a team, who are coming together, who are getting to know one another. There are those who maybe say, well, where was your big players? Where were they first half?
Joe Cooper didn't have the impact in the game we might have expected.
No, absolutely. Joel being one, Jimmy Glacken being another. Players, the big standout players. But then again, Matthew Shevlin did. He came to the party, and as I say, players are not robots. They're human beings. They're ordinary folk like us. And maybe the expectations we put on them, at times are higher than maybe they should be. But Coleraine, to me, that was a solid point. They will have learned. Rory will have learned, and he will remind them again. Listen, you see, over here, you don't get any gimmies. He will go back to the Bangor game. Where Bangor went out, and let's be honest, Coleraine mightn't have been great. Bangor were absolutely excellent on the day. So they're learning as they're going along. But at this moment in time, they're sitting top of the league, Keith.
Absolutely. Well, this is the first game of a quartet of games between Coleraine and Linfield, and it was brilliant. I don't know about you, but I can't wait for the next 3.
Absolutely loved it, Keith. Bring it on.